Hello, beautiful homemakers. Over the years, during both secular and Christian classes, and in many books that I've read, traits of an ideal woman have been discussed. Some emphasize the Proverbs 31 and Titus 2 women, and many, though few will admit to it, describe the traits mentioned in the 1960s bestseller, Fascinating Womanhood, a book that feminists loathe. If you learn about these ideal woman traits, and then watch either the 1933 or the 1949 movies Little Women, both of which are excellent, you will see that Meg is the epitome of the ideal woman from a man's point of view, and that Amy has followed in her footsteps. Beth stays angelic, never developing her human side, and Jo, the boisterous tomboy heroine of the story, exuberantly does everything a woman is not supposed to do. But once she grows up, in the book Jo's Boys, she naturally begins to develop the ideal woman traits, because they are natural. Unfortunately, beginning in the 1960s, and in some cases even in the 1920s with the flappers, outspoken feminists began to denigrate the traits that men admire so much in women, and our media and schools have done a great job of getting many women to suppress their natural feminine traits today by lying to them and showing women in movies who do the opposite of what men actually like. When you have time, listen to the interview I'm going to link below of an ex-cosmopolitan writer, Sue Ellen Browder, on the Suzanne Vinker channel, about the lies that were sold to women through magazines. Yet it is these ideal women traits that are the very things that drive men gaga, long-married husbands included. Now, during one class I took long ago, we were asked to name the first favorite fictional female character that came to our mind. And for me, it was Lucy Muir of the 1947 movie The Ghost and Mrs. Muir. Growing up, I always thought that my favorite part of the movie was the wonderful house. But in analyzing the movie, I realized that I resonated with Lucy Muir's worthy character when I was a child and first saw this movie on television. And then, after completing an assignment from the book A Fascinating Companion, which I will talk about at the end of the video, I realized that Lucy Muir had all the characteristics of the ideal woman from a man's point of view. While she's undeniably beautiful of face and figure, she's also feminine, the first ideal woman trait. Look at the lace at her neck and on her sleeves, and the fitted attire. That's a hallmark of elegance and femininity. Now, compare her dress, especially the shoulders, to Martha's dress. Mrs. Muir was also a domestic queen, another characteristic of a woman who fascinates men. Here, Martha tells Mrs. Muir that she's done enough work for the day and must go upstairs to take a nap. "But I've nearly finished," the perfect homemaker pouts to her housekeeper, who does all the heavy lifting. Now pay attention to Mrs. Muir's fancy hairdo as she's tucking her daughter, played by 9-year-old Natalie Wood, into bed. It's extremely feminine. Lucy Muir is also a good mother, which is another part of being a domestic queen. The book by Helen Andelin said domestic goddess, but most women thought that phrase too outlandish and changed it. Old Hollywood knew how to dress women. Mrs. Muir was played by Gene Tierney, and her soon-to-be ex-husband was the famous Hollywood clothing designer Oleg Cassini, who designed all the costumes for this movie. He also dressed First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy in the 1960s. He had to make Jean's dresses extra long for this movie because she broke her foot or her leg a day or so before filming began and was still in a cast when they began filming. Notice how her dress is tapered to give her an hourglass figure. We can tailor our own store-bought dresses to have a similar effect, just by using safety pins and a bit of hand sewing. Here she is speaking to the ghost for the first time. Captain Daniel Gregg is played by Rex Harrison, and here he is telling her to leave his house. She is putting her foot down, literally, by stomping and defying him in a childlike way, asking him for what she wants, but not yelling or screaming at him. As he balks, she again stomps and says, "Blast!" a crude word of the day, which made him laugh because it's a favorite word of his own. "Temper," he chides her, but she has already won him over with her tender, changeful ways. This trait is called childlikeness, and it looks nothing like childishness. Then she turns from him with a sob, telling him she loves the house and that it called to her to rescue it. Relenting, he reasons, "You love the house, that counts for you." For he loved the house too. In fact, he designed it. Handling arguments with husbands in a childlike, not childish, way is a huge reason feminists despise the book Fascinating Womanhood. But the author, and Mrs. Muir, understands men, another fascinating womanhood trait. An example of being childlike is stomping your foot instead of spouting off. It is saying, "Ouch," when he flings a barb at you instead of just flinging one back at him. Feminine dress, childlikeness of manner, in a comfortable and clean room means she's a domestic queen. When the word feminist comes to mind, do you picture a woman who is beautiful, with a caring nature, loving ways, a soft voice, a trustful nature, one who shines with inner happiness? Neither do men. Say the word feminist, and people picture loud, outspoken women who try to emulate men, all while trying to feminize men at the same time. Feminists demand that you think like they do, and they'll argue with you if you disagree. Feminists love to talk about toxic masculinity, but 82% of women say they are not feminists because they like men and they are attracted to masculine men. One condition of Lucy Muir staying in the captain's house, which is called Gull Cottage, is that she moved the captain's portrait into her bedroom. She does so and begins to undress. Seeing the portrait watching her in the mirror, she covers it with an afghan and continues to change into her nightdress. Mrs. Muir has a worthy character. In this next shot, Mrs. Muir has awakened the ghost's masculine protectiveness, which is another trait of understands men. Look at that posture. That's a trait of being feminine. To make money to live on, Mrs. Muir sets out to write Captain Gregg's life story called Blood and Swash, as dictated by him. An unvarnished story of a seaman's life, he states. It certainly is unvarnished, she retorts, as she grudgingly types in words and phrases that are not ladylike, and thus affronting her worthy character. Typing this book serves as a creative outlet, which is part of her inner happiness, another FW trait. She's also serving him as he provides for her, another part of understands men. Since the ghost is unable to touch her, when Mrs. Muir is downhearted about her lack of finances and the overdue rent, the captain pivots from companion to protector and provider, giving her a good talking to about finishing their book. He builds her up, and so she follows him inside. This is as close to a love scene as you are going to get. Sleeping Beauty and a ghost. The ideal woman is adored, and the ideal woman shows her man admiration. She has long talks with him, and here she is again raising her pert nose in disagreement, a trait of childlikeness. Notice that she is not yelling. She is simply stating her beliefs that align with her worthy character. A man in the flesh would not be able to resist kissing her upturned nose. See his smile? The ideal, fascinating woman also knows to always let her man help her, and lets him lead and guide, so that they'll live happily ever after, side by side. As part of her worthy character, she is unselfish and is always being considerate of others. And yet, at the same time, she manages to take care of her physical and emotional needs and please herself, which is childlikeness and contributes to her inner happiness, another trait of a fascinating woman. And she never acts the part of a martyr. Women who play the martyr through constant complaints, bickering, nagging, frowning, sighing, and outright arguing are avoided by both men and women. A fascinating woman is joyful and displays both radiant happiness and radiant health. And these traits are discussed in the original 1922 Fascinating Womanhood pamphlets, numbers 1 through 4. So how do you become a thankful, joyful, restful woman? By living out the traits of fascinating womanhood. And it starts by thanking your man for every little thing he does for you. I have heard extremely foolish women say that they won't thank their husband for doing dishes or laundry, or picking up their socks, for making the bed or making dinner, because they'd have to do all those things if she wasn't there. That's just a part of living. So why should she thank him for doing the necessary work of simply living? To thank him would mean that it's her job, her responsibility, and that he's just helping her out a little. He doesn't thank me when I make dinner or do the dishes or do his laundry, so why should I thank him when he does? She frowns. Foolish, foolish women who tear down their own homes with their own hands and words. These women turn into unthankful, uptight, anxious shrews. Their marriages don't last. They become complaining, bitter, disagreeable, tense, superior wives. The exact opposite of the joyful, carefree, companionable, light-hearted, laughing women who practice fascinating womanhood. Wouldn't you like to be thanked for making dinner? or doing the dishes, making the bed, cleaning the bathroom, doing the laundry, or whatever other work you do? I just thanked my husband for doing the dishes, and he replied, I did it because I love you. If I never thanked him for cleaning up, how would he know that I appreciated it? Start the thankful ball rolling by thanking him first for every little thing he does for you. Does he go to work and put money into an account that you both share? Have you ever written him a note thanking him for providing for you? Put one in his lunch bag or his briefcase or his car. Tape it to the car steering wheel. Does he take your car to the filling station or hop out of the car to pump so that you don't have to? Does he run any errands for you? Does he watch the kids when you desperately need a massage or just to meet up with a girlfriend? Does he mow the lawn or do any other work around the house? Does he work on your car or take your car in for service? If you're at the grocery store, do you thank the checker and the person who bags your groceries? I sure hope you do. Do you thank your server at a restaurant? I'm sure you do. These people are performing a service for you, and you show your gratitude by thanking them, even though they're just doing their job, the necessary work that must be done. If you currently have a paid position, doesn't it feel good to be thanked by the person to whom you have helped on the phone, transferred a call to, handed a paper, given a report to, administered medicine to? Don't people on the receiving end of the work you just did for them thank you? To become a joy-filled, gracious, rested woman, you start by thanking your husband or boyfriend, your child, or any other person who does any little thing for you. Gratitude for others breeds gratitude for you. You'll find that the people you thank will begin thanking you for what you do for them, husbands included. It begins with you. And then, within 2 years, you'll find that you no longer have to nag. You no longer have to sigh in frustration. You no longer have to do all the housework yourself. You no longer feel that there isn't enough time to do all that needs to be done. You're rested because everyone around you wants to help that joyful woman who is so thankful and gracious to them. They want to see your smile. They want to help you. And this is the end result of being a fascinating woman. 2 years? You may shriek. Does 2 years sound too long to you? Well, not to worry. Most women, if they persist, see a huge change in the people around them within 6 months. It's just that they are waiting for you to change back into anxious, shrew, wicked witch mode. They don't believe your conversion. They're waiting to see if it sticks. So persist. Become that laughing, joy-filled, smiling woman that you truly want to be. Your life will change for the better every day in small ways as you begin living your authentic, feminine self. Stop complaining. Be thankful for every little thing. It turns out that the old hymn, "Count your many blessings, name them one by one," spoke the truth. Are you disappointed in your marriage? Do you feel like you married the wrong man? Guess what? All women and men feel this way at some point in their marriage, usually fairly early on. It takes dying to self, giving up your selfishness to make a marriage work. Fairy tales aren't true. It takes work. And feeling that you made a mistake in marrying him is normal. But you want to be desired, right? Cherished even. You have a lot more influence on him than you can even imagine. You can make your marriage magical. How? It starts by being joyful. And repeat after me. Thanking him for every little thing. Show him respect, gratitude, give him some alone time, especially when he comes home from work. If you are disappointed in your marriage, chances are high that you're being controlling and disrespecting him without even consciously realizing what you're doing. Many women don't even realize that they're being disrespectful to their husbands. They don't see it as disrespectful, but he does. Let me read a little excerpt from the 1953 book Daddy is a Layman by Laverne Ball Davis. I love this little autobiography and discovered that Laverne lived just a few miles away from my home when she was little. Listen to this from page 85. Mother and Daddy have always been each other's press agents. Their glowing mutual praise warmed the hearth fires and made my home stock soar. Psychiatrists probe into the depths and sometimes the dregs of human personality for factors of marital bliss, and overlook such homely magic as a hot, ready dinner and a soapy washcloth welcome. Mother had a lot of little tricks that bound Daddy to her with hoops of steel, but I'm sure that the dearest one was her soapy washcloth welcome. When he came home from a long, hard day of work and sweat, with those weary wonderings if life were worth so much struggle, Mother often met him, smiling, with a steaming, soapy washcloth. Sit down, honey. Let me wash your face for you. As Mother bathed the grime from his eyes and face and neck and ears and kissed the clean places, a load of weariness vanished. No wonder he could look at her with new eyes and tell her, "You are the most wonderful wife in the world." On page 86, she says, "Perhaps these are foolish and intimate little things to write in a book, but they are the living and breathing reasons I have seen for a happy home. I have seen that it is the apparently insignificant endearments that keep a couple sweethearts forever. And it is for want of the daily little rekindlings that so many hearth fires go out." Truer words were never spoken. When Daddy is away from home, his letters to Mother are always adoring love letters. And when Mama reads them aloud, she still skips the adoring parts, blushes, and looks pretty. It's wonderful to live in a home where one is much loved, and it is more wonderful to learn to love much. I have seen that homes where love is put not only into actions, but into words of affection, are the happiest homes. And the people who are learning to give out love without measure are the happiest people. On page 87, she said, "High on the itemized list of my Thanksgiving for the wonderful heritage of a Christian home is laughter. Our home rang with enough laughter to fill a much larger house and shake the ribs of a family 3 times the size of ours. We laughed when things were going well. We laughed when things went wrong. We laughed at the desperation point. I remember one of those desperation points. It was reached on a night back in the Orange Ranch during smudging season. We sat in the dining room listening to the nightly radio frost warning, Daddy, Mother, Grandmother Henderson, and I. When orchard heating for the 3rd night was predicted, Daddy turned off the radio and put his head in his hands. Mother went into a slump. Grandmother and I looked at each other hopelessly. I wanted to cry. Everyone was weary from the night work of lighting the orchard fires. It was Grandmother who suddenly saw humor in our dejected appearance. She began to laugh. Her laughter was hearty and contagious. No one could resist joining in, feebly at first. But soon we were rocking and shouting with laughter. We hugged each other and laughed together. The tears ran down our faces. We pounded each other. It was better than a chiropractic treatment. The laughter shook all the gloom from our hearts. We felt rested and ready for anything. On page 89, she talks about how she could never enjoy an uninterrupted spell of self-pity. She could never enjoy a good cry because her daddy always said, "Quick, whistle!" And she talks about laughing despite the world being so full of upsets and surprises. We laughed because the unexpected is always happening in human relationships. We laughed because good, intelligent people could hold views so diametrically opposite to ours. We laughed because they were all so busy with projects to improve the world that they could never take time to stop and be improved by ours. We laughed because people are warm, alive, unpredictable, and lovable. Most of all, we laughed at ourselves because we were so much a part of the perverse and perfect humanness. We laughed when we were too tired and perplexed to do anything else. We laughed because in spite of its unexplained tragedy and darkness, the universe is good at heart. I believe that only a Christian can really laugh. Deep down laughter from an unloaded heart. It's so much fun to be a Christian, you can't help but laugh. So much fun to know that you are a child of a wonderful Heavenly Father. So much fun to be free from resentments, fears, jealousies, and worry. These are the things that choke the laughter. When they get out, you've struck the artisan well, and the laughter starts bubbling and overflowing. Yours are the 4 freedoms, and you feel like laughing and laughing. John 3:36 says, "If the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed." If people the world over knew this simple remedy, they would stop fighting and laugh. On page 90, she says, "But sometimes life plants in our road great and terrible mountains, mountains that cannot be loved away, laughed over, or climbed by hard work. Only prayer and faith in God can match these mountains." And I'm going to skip a bit. Daddy would say at night, "It was a hard job today, but the Lord helped me and it turned out fine." Mother's accounts usually ran, "Oh, the Lord helped me get so much work done that I had time to make several calls on new families for Sunday school." These reports of adventures with God through the commonplace were given as naturally as breathing, and my young eyes saw something that took the everydayness out of living and put into ordinary moments the shining secret of divine partnership. For I saw God's hands working alongside of Mother and Daddy's, and the little hills rejoicing on every side. Because my parents prayed, I have seen humanly unsurmountable mountains removed, seen them become a way, break forth into singing, and even dance for joy. Because they demonstrated persistent, undismayed faith in God, I have been taught when facing my impossible mountain to say, "This is an opportunity for God." Thank God for mountain-moving faith and prayer. And then she talks about all the things that went wrong on page 91. The author's husband contracted polio. Each of her parents had critical surgery, etc. And then she ends with, "Daddy has always avowed that his health is wonderful. And yet, as I think of it now, I believe that 2/3 of it has been a merry heart. For years he silently bore the torture of frequent migraine headaches, and times innumerable I saw him start for a boys' club or a board meeting with pain wrinkles in his forehead and tears of pain running from one eye. Mountains must be meant for something. How many times through the strenuous trial of the soul a man is being prepared for some deeper service to mankind. Then in the blackest hour of discouragement, when he thinks that his years of usefulness are over, God calls to him out of the mountain." And it goes on from there, telling amazing things they did in their 70s and beyond. Laughter, so important. Now, to wrap up, if you are interested in learning more about fascinating womanhood, I'm reading the original 8 pamphlets written in 1922 on YouTube. They were written by behavioral scientists after in-depth studies of men and women, with the intention of helping average women learn how to capture a man's heart. You can listen to my playlist, or if you prefer written form, Cynthia Behringer has retyped the 1935 version of the 8 pamphlets, and they're available in her 246-page book, The Original Fascinating Womanhood Pamphlets. Now, the most known of the Fascinating Womanhood books is Helen Andelin's 1963 book, which was based on the original 8 pamphlets, but completely rewritten. If you're interested in her book, I recommend you buy the 2007 version, which has a green and white cover, and it's a Bantam book. It expanded upon the original 1963 hardback and contains success letters and has assignments. I also have the 1971 hardback, and it's lovely. However, I was personally disappointed with the vintage version because many of the biblical aspects were deleted, as well as some assignments, Bible verses, and success letters. I have also read the book Secrets of Fascinating Womanhood on YouTube, and that's in a playlist. That book was written by David Corey, and he used actual Fascinating Womanhood classes and success letters sent to Helen Andelin as the model for his novel, and that book is especially helpful for married women. If you're unmarried, I'd suggest the original, The Fascinating Girl, instead of Fascinating Womanhood. It's very similar to FW, but it focuses more on traits that attract men and omits success letters and assignments meant for married women who are trying to keep their love alive or win back a husband in a faltering marriage. Fascinating Girl ends with advice from the original pamphlets about how to get him to I do. I also highly recommend the book A Fascinating Companion by Cynthia Behringer, for which you will need the 2007 version of FW to complete the do-it-yourself course, which takes 6 months to a year. Now, you may balk at the price, but the book is actually worth the money, if you do it. And you can use that book with Fascinating Womanhood or Fascinating Girl. I also suggest that you read or listen to the short story that I've recorded called When Queens Ride By. It's available on my website at beautifulhomemakers.com and on my channel. This was my very first video on YouTube. Now, the pictures I used on this video were from the 1947 movie The Ghost of Mrs. Muir, but the original book was written by R.A. Dick. The author's real name was Josephine Leslie, but it was written during a time when women authors weren't often published, thus the nom de plume. The book is quite different from the movie, but I think you'll enjoy it. How I wish I could read it to you, but let me just read you a short excerpt. Mrs. Muir was a little woman. Everyone was agreed upon that point. Where others were merely referred to as Mrs. Brown and Mrs. Smith, she was invariably spoken of as Little Mrs. Muir, or Dear Little Mrs. Muir, and latterly as Poor Little Mrs. Muir, for her husband, that upright member of the church and indifferent architect, had died suddenly, leaving her with 2 children and an inadequate income. That is how the book starts. It's the first page, but page 3. My favorite line is on pages 3 and 4. This, said little Mrs. Muir, awakening one morning to a beam of March sunlight striking through the eastern window across her face. This has got to stop. I must settle things for myself. And as if to encourage her in her independence, a blackbird's brave song full of spring and new beginnings floated up to her from the garden below. I will leave Whitchester, she said aloud, and suddenly sitting up in bed and flinging aside the blankets, she said again, But I will leave Whitchester. Why didn't I think of it before? It's the only solution. Now, personally, I like the movie more than the book. Before YouTube was born, I would pop that 1947 VHS movie into the VCR and play the first half of the movie while I cleaned my house. I couldn't even see the screen because I would usually be working in the kitchen, and the VCR and TV were in the front room. But I could hear that hauntingly beautiful score by Bernard Herrmann, and I learned all of the dialogue. Then when it got to the middle of the movie where Miles Fairley enters, I would rewind. Then one day I noticed that the movie was adapted from a book, and I was able to track down that book at a cozy little library that resembled a home, with a lovely backyard to read in, and I was in storybook heaven. I loved the opening of the book, but like I said, I enjoyed the movie much more than the book. There are definitely some variations. So now you know how I started my obsession with The Ghost of Mrs. Muir and Gull Cottage. Actually started when I was a child watching the TV show, but that first half of the movie evokes such peace, and now I know that Mrs. Muir is a fascinating woman. No wonder I wanted to emulate her. May God bless you as you seek to be His ideal woman.